Maybe it's time for you to get one.
Oh.
I'll share you.
I've held out this long.
I know that's true. That's true. That's true. Well, I'm going to share with you on YouTube anyway. But what a pleasure it is to introduce Dr. Sharon Washington to Cal Poly Pomona. This event is sponsored by Michi Weglyn, the sociology department, and also the Peer Mentor 15 cohort group class. And we have another group of class that will probably watch the video later on. It's on leadership and self-reflection. So thank you so much for coming. I wanted to start off with just some introductions about who you are, since some of the students and some of the viewers may not know who you are. And then, we'll just have a conversation as we talked about.
Sure.
So one of the things that I got from Dr. Washington's website is a quote that I really, really love. And I think this really embodies who she is. A hallmark of Sharon's leadership is her recognition that a team is more than a collection of individuals. And one of the things that, for me, that definitely embodies who Dr. Washington is. But more so than anything, as you can see from just, looking at her, she exudes warmth, she exudes welcoming, she exudes positivity with fierceness and with intentional goal of promoting a space in higher education that is inclusive, accessible, and mindful of the diverse bodies of students that we have on campus. So I had the luxury of getting to know Dr. Washington when we were, I think, on an advisory committee, advisory planning meeting for the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity in Higher Ed in, I think it was in Oklahoma, was the very first time that we really got to meet. We met each other at conferences prior, but that's where we really bonded. And it's no wonder, because this woman and this person has just an exorbitant amount of experience in higher education. So she received her PhD in education from Ohio State University. She received her master's in Central Michigan University and a bachelor's in science at Ohio State University, but she currently resides in California in Oakland. And her scholarship has been revolved around social justice education, and her writings focus on multicultural alliances and coping with emotional, intellectual challenges of teaching about social justice. So how timely is it right now with everything that we're going through today? Dr. Washington has, over 3 decades of professional experience, although she looks like she's, just barely 30. And she has experience in higher ed, in K through 12, nonprofit, and in the arts. She actually does a lot of different kind of philanthropy work in the Oakland area as well. She was an interim provost and dean of faculty at Mills College. She was also the executive director of National Writing Project, a professional learning network based on 200 universities, 200 university-based local sites focused on improving instruction and writing. And through this project, they were able to raise more than $105 million from federal foundation and corporate individual donors. She was also the provost and professor of education at Spelman College in Atlanta. And she was a special assistant to the president of diversity initiatives at Bennett College for Women. She has just a list of work that she does in terms of executive coaching with higher leadership, as well as, ongoing effort to provide support and alliances for folks like myself and folks like you who are watching and those who are in the Zoom meeting. She is the founder of the director of the Project Spirit of Springfield College of Massachusetts. As she developed this advising system that improves student retention and graduation rate, especially for students who are underrepresented. I think one of the best things that I can tell you about Dr. Washington is her ability to always be present. I think the one reason why so many folks seek her out for her continued guidance, because even though after she officially retired from her provost position, she's a sought after leader to help coach and help solve some challenging issues that are facing our higher education system. And I think it's especially in terms of areas of leadership, including student leadership, is like, how do we mentor? How do we build alliances? How do we create teams? How do we address the inequities that exist in our higher education? Is something she is a keen expert in. So I am so excited to welcome Sharon Washington. Doctor, welcome. Woo!
Oh my goodness, that was like, wow. That felt a little intense.
Well, I didn't share about your, artistic eye. That's something maybe off, video we'll share with my students anyway, all the incredible eye you have for interior design and all the fun stuff. And our love for dancing. I think we really
Oh my
bonded
goodness,
when she and I danced for hours at a time after a very long meeting. We're like, we need to get some stress out. So yeah, welcome. So, those you see in our those you see in our presence today are our peer mentors
okay.
and some social majors who may be popping in. And I think on Facebook Live, we know that our friends at NCORE have also shared this. So we have people from probably across the nation watching it as well. So yeah, exciting. So as I said today, I thought we might just have a conversation, right, about especially social justice education and leadership. But let's first start off with you. I know I gave kind of your professional biography, but can you maybe share with those in our Zoom room your experiences? Like who is Sharon Washington, and what are you all about? And how did you end up getting into higher education?
Oh my goodness. Why don't we start with something a little easier?
You know me, Sharon, I'm never easy. So yeah, so I mean, where did you grow up and how did you enter this field? You I mean, you obviously could have done so many different things. What called you to this profession?
Oh my goodness. Well, I grew up in outside of the Columbus, Ohio, so I'm a Midwesterner. I think I was called to education. It's not too surprising because my mom was a teacher. My parents, especially my dad, loved Ohio State. So I thought, it's the hometown school. Why not go there? And I think that early on, I liked the idea of teaching. I liked the idea of being a coach. I thought I would be, I don't know what I was going to actually coach, but I loved the idea of being, a coach. And I think that early on and this is when I was truly young, I was really sort of, I mean, it's going to mark me as a nerd, but I was an avid Girl Scout. And I actually graduated high school as an active Girl Scout, which is pretty rare. I was still selling cookies as a junior and senior in high school. Yeah. However, the bright side was that I actually had some amazing leadership opportunities through scouting. And I had Girl Scout leaders who really believed in letting it be girl led. From the time that I was in fourth grade, when I talk about my fourth grade, actually, she was our leader, fourth, fifth, and sixth grade when we were juniors, but she took us out. I remember one March, we were in the fourth grade, and she told our parents, your children will be gone every weekend during the month of March. I think some parents were like celebrating and some were like, what? They can't go away that often. And she literally taught us everything from riflery, canoeing, archery. We did overnight horseback trips. She had us out. We'd been getting lessons from, I remember, a 70-year-old Swiss man for canoe lessons that started in one of the girls in the troop's grandparents' farm pond. And if you don't know anything about farm ponds are a little stinky because it's where the cattle and the livestock get to water. And so they had them sort of kept away from the pond when the girls would come. And so we would put canoes in, and it was fairly shallow and again, very stinky, but that's where we learned how to start canoeing. And from there, we got to graduate to a creek until finally we got to a river. And we were doing overnight canoe pack trips. And we just learned so much about being a leader and what does it mean to be a leader of a patrol within your troop, and just to take on leadership, even if it was just teaching something. And so I was teaching from a very early age. I got to start teaching. And it was just something that I just sort of decided I was going to do.
I mean, I love that example because I think a lot of times, as you know, in a lot of the CSUs and a lot of this, especially in California, where you and I both are from, or well, you're actually, I kind of feel like you're from Oakland, but I know you're not. But, we have a lot of first generation college students, underrepresented college students who sometimes don't realize their life experiences are filled with leadership experiences.
Mhm.
You know, how do we get folks like what you drew on with the Girl Scouts? I'm sure a lot of folks watching right now can kind of tap into their lives, whether it's through an organized
Mhm.
place like Girl Scouts or through their family. What do you do to get folks to kind of tap into their inner leader? How do you get folks to tap into their own experience to say, hey, you know, I have these qualities and I could expand on it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think looking at your own experiences, whether with your family, it might be with your religious communities, it could be in youth sports, but there are so many ways to think about your own leadership, because I do believe that leaders aren't just those who are in sort of appointed positions of leadership, but you can lead from wherever you are. So what's the kind of leadership you took on your sports team or in a club? And maybe you were just a leader among the siblings in your family, where you said, you know, we're going to have a lemonade stand, or we're going to figure out how to collect recycling. And you just took leadership in that area, and really thinking about how do you build on those opportunities? What did you learn through those opportunities? And really recognizing that we can lead from anywhere.
Mhm.
We don't have to always have the blessing of somebody else to say you're a leader.
Right. I think one of the things that you and I have talked about before in other sessions that I hear from our students, and I'm sure you hear from the leaders that you coach, is the notion of imposter syndrome.
Ah,
I think the idea that, you know, while many of us may know that, yes, sure, you know, I did the lemonade stand, but I don't know if I'm really that worthy of being a leader. I don't know if I actually belong. How would you talk to someone about overcoming or navigating or managing the notions of imposter syndrome?
right. Well, I do think that the syndrome actually comes because of the ways that our society is organized.
Mhm.
It really feeds into systemic racism and sexism and heterosexism. And because you don't see the imposter syndrome happening for those folks who have maybe privilege around race or around gender or around gender identity, you don't see it happening as often. And
Mhm.
so you have to ask yourself, you know, am I serving the system by perpetuating whatever it is, systemic racism or sexism? Am I perpetuating that by believing that I myself can't be a leader? Just
Mhm.
because I might not see images of myself, and certainly there are more images today than there were in the 60s when I was growing up. Um, but I also had parents who were fierce,
Mhm.
who were really clear that even though they sent us to predominantly white schools, they wanted us to know that we are smart, we are loved, we are intelligent, we come from intelligent people, because they were really neat. They understood they needed to counteract what we would receive at school.
Mhm. Mhm.
And early on, we learned to become discerning. In the beginning, I was very confused. My parents sent us off to school and said, you are not to believe your white teachers if they tell you things about who you are, if it's different than what you hear at home. And in the beginning, I'm thinking, okay, but our teachers are our teachers, but I'm not supposed to believe them always. So it was like this, you know, it felt like this tension where I was very confused.
Yeah.
And early on, we got to see examples of that,
Mhm.
because the teachers, oh, so sometimes I talk in the plural as when I was young. So I just want you to know, um, I really do see myself as an individual, but I'm an identical twin. And, and when we were young, it's really hard for me to talk of myself as a singular.
Mhm.
It only happens when I get toward my final years of high school that I can refer to myself in the singular. I'm not really interested in investing much money in working that out.
Mhm.
So it's
So are
like,
you really an identical twin?
I am an identical twin.
I had no idea. And what is
Yeah.
your twin? I'm just curious. What does your twin do?
So her name is Sandra. And I am so proud that last night she found out that she was in the top 2 or 3 of vote getters in the primary elections in Lincoln, Nebraska for city council.
Oh,
She has
wow.
made it onto the general election. And I'm like, yeah, go sis. So, but she's also a retired National Park Service employee. She was the associate director of the Midwest region. where she was in charge of doing research for new parks, governmental relations in DC. And she's a biologist by training. She loves grasses and sedges. Uh, she took me on a couple of research projects with her where I got to count all of the grasses that grew in a 3-foot line. Wow, that was fascinating. And so I mean, I love scientists, but I realized that was not for me. Um, but she was also, you know, an avid Girl Scout. We both graduated being active Girl Scouts, and then she stayed in the Midwest and moved to Nebraska, where she's been for years. But I'm just so proud of her ability to build alliances, why she's been there. Yeah.
It's so interesting because I want to go back to what you said about not being able to trust your teachers, right? Which is quite confusing, definitely, right? Because many of us are socialized to, at least the way I was socialized was to kind of respect your teachers, right? You just kind of, I don't know if my parents ever said trust your teachers though, but I remember saying you got to respect your teachers. But you know, going back to the notion of systematic racism and institutional barriers that exist for a lot of us, of communities of color, especially for women and, you know, communities of color, when you think about your own upbringing, your parents' support and fierceness of saying, hey, you know, you can do anything and you're loved, unfortunately, many students out there do not have that, right? I mean, whether they're in from a nuclear family or an intact household or whatever, they don't necessarily have loving parents all the time or parents who understand. There's cultural issues and gender issues and all that stuff. How do you talk to leaders, whether it's at the professor level or at the administrative level, deans and presidents, about responding to students who, you know, could very well become the next generation of leaders, but may not have that kind of support? What do you recommend to institutions to provide that kind of climate or culture on a campus where if they may not get it at home, but they can get it at school? Like, are there things that you've done, I'm sure you have, to kind of create that kind of culture and climate?
There is. I mean, I think that there are always going to be faculty and some staff who are those people, those places where the students know that that's a person that I can go and talk to. I can just sort of be me. I can ask questions. And whether they're students who were in your classes or they just heard about me through the grapevine. Because I would always have students that I didn't know who would come to my door and just say, hi, so one of my friends is in your class and I'd heard about you and I was wondering if I could just talk with you for a moment. I said, sure, what's going on? And sometimes they would hover outside of my classrooms because they didn't want to come to my office hours, or maybe it wasn't convenient. They would just wait. And I'd say, oh, are you waiting for someone? They said, yeah, you. And I say, okay, great. Do you want to come to my office? And so there always have been, and there always will be, those faculty and staff where students know that they can go. It's a place where they can be themselves and to ask questions. In terms of structurally or systemically or systematically, institutions really can set up student organizations or support those being formed, and also have offices that the students know this is a place where I can go and ask any kind of question, and no one will think that I'm unprepared or not smart for asking this question. Only one place have I been where the institution, this was Mills, set up a student advocate that was really out of social work. And the individual really sort of took students on more like a case project, and they would help students navigate whether it was grades or navigate books or whatever it could be. A student could go there knowing that that one person they could take their questions to. And before students would, if you're looking at academic progress, and I'm very aware that in your first year, it can be very unsettling to be in school, especially if it feels like it's different than your high school academically. And I mean, just as I'll be honest with you, I had some challenges. I went to a great high school. I got to college. I was like, what is this? Ohio State had 45,000 students. And at the same time, I was grappling with being out. And I got a 0.76 Wow, that is probably one of the lowest grade point averages. I mean, so I just want to be real with you. I did not do well my first quarter at Ohio State.
Mhm.
And I was so glad that I had an advisor who said, it's all right, and let's really think about how to get you back on the right track. And they had something called a freshman forgiveness rule, which I would rename this year today as a first year forgiveness rule. But it was a beautiful program that just said, so what? You got distracted, you messed up. You can retake those classes and that GPA will go away.
Mhm.
I think if I hadn't had that, it would have been really hard to want to go forward feeling like I had to pull my GPA up versus really just getting those classes taken off and replaced with the same class, different grade.
Mhm.
I thought it was a really good way to support students and to understand that things happen during your first year that you're not prepared for. I
Yeah,
know, yeah.
call that the first year. I don't know, because the same thing happened to me. Like my first year, I don't think I had a 0.76. I think you beat me there, but yeah, I basically failed one of my classes because I was a bad student. I just didn't go. I don't. I mean, I'm like, this class is boring. I'm not gonna go. But yeah, I think in terms of like advising and creating that systematic structure for students, I think many schools are doing that, but I know that you do a lot of trainings with administrators and teams. Is that how do we get folks to, one, address unconscious bias with students? Because the reality is that even though we have all the implementations of centers and places and people, it doesn't always go well. And also the microaggression that a lot of our students of color experience and queer students experience, that when they go in, they're not sure if they're safe, right? So what are things that we can do as leaders, professors, administrators, or student leaders to exude that sense of safeness? Because just saying I'm safe,
Mhm.
I don't know if students will, it doesn't always work, right?
And there's a little skepticism.
Right.
I mean, so I have to say that for me, I asked faculty, because I work more with faculty than I do staff, but I asked faculty to make the assumption that there are plenty of things that you don't know.
Right.
And that your good intentions are really not going to be good enough. And so I asked them, be honest with your students to say like, hey, listen, we're going to be dealing with a number of issues in class. We guess we have the topic, but we also know current events will begin to impact some of the things that happen during the course. And there might be things that you have questions about or you want to challenge. And I would say, please do that. And I will recognize that as the faculty member or as a white person or as a whatever it is, you have to be able to locate yourself. And you can't, it doesn't work to say, I'm a safe person. You have to be able to do something that lets the students know that you actually come from that place. So one of the things that I would do is I would give my students extra credit. And I'd say the first one who can sort of get me for saying something that caused harm doesn't mean that I was trying to do that, but because I just didn't know. The words were out of my mouth. And I said, so if you can call ouch on me, because I would give all the students an opportunity. I said, if something is said, whether it's by me or another student, or if we're reading something in an article or in our textbook that you just want to say like, ouch, that didn't feel right. You don't have to explain yourself, but we all pause for a moment and notice that something that just happened caused some harm. And you don't get to go back to the students and say, well, tell us why. He's like, no, we just get to notice that. And I said, and I know you're going to be hesitant to do that. So you get extra credit if you're one of the first 3 students who does it on me. So then students are like waiting with a buzzer because they're like, we've heard she's hard, so we're going to get extra credit.
So what were some of the things that you were told early on from those buzzers from the students that you were just like, oh.
Yeah, so like I got to learn that my lens around ableism, not so good. Like I had some real learning to do. So somebody had asked me about the weekend and I had said something about, oh, I had just done blah, 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 and it was lame.
Mm,
Somebody buzzed in right away and said, ouch, seems like ableism. And I was like, oh my goodness, thank you very much. Great. So first of all, I just want to let Erica know that she gets extra credit. Check, boom. Thank you, Erica. And I want to thank you for that because I didn't even recognize that was in my language or that it was problematic. So thank you. I'm going to have to really think about that and how I use that word. Boom. So what I've done is I've not tried to say, oh, I didn't intend to, I'm a good person. Many of my friends have disabilities. I was just like, oh, great. Thank you so much. And so I have to model being okay with being called out.
mhm,
It's like, because we all make mistakes. It's how we recover.
mhm,
It's like, I'm not trying to be perfect. I am trying to be better. And I'm hoping and it probably was the only time in that class that I used that language. And probably I think in any other class as well, because I want to make new mistakes. I don't want to make the same ones again. So again, not looking for perfection, looking for what do we do in that moment? Can we be gracious? Can we sort of own it?
mhm,
And that's really what was most important to me when I was trying to model that. And so I try to help other faculty and staff learn the same thing
mhm.
because, we're all in this journey. And that was after still years of teaching about social justice. There's still always something every single time.
Yeah,
And
I
I might
love,
just be mispronouncing a word, but
yeah,
that's okay.
I love that. Okay, class, I'll give you extra credit when you can call me out on something. I love that. I think that is awesome, especially right now, during this whole pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic, we had the Black Lives Matter, you know, I wouldn't say it's a new movement because it really started with Trayvon Martin. And even before that, if you look at the civil rights and the Third World Liberation Front, in terms of the act for civil rights and, call for justice for so many communities of colors and especially, Black bodies. But during the quarantine or during the pandemic, we really did see an influx of, you know, hatred and violence against Black bodies, during 2020. And then we saw an upshot of violence against Asian Americans. And so all this anti-Asian hate which is not a surprise when you think about the initial call from our former administration of demonizing people from China or demonizing people of Asian descent. So we've just seen a horrific rise, especially against women, right? Especially elderly women. And a couple of our students here have been really wanting to do a public service statement about, calling against, anti-Asian hate, but also finding a way to bridge that solidarity. And I think one of the things that I'm concerned about, Sharon, and I'm sure you're going to be called on from a lot of schools, is that when we begin to reopen, is that it's not like things are normal, right? You open the school and everyone gets back to the way it was. The wounds are deep, right? For Black and brown bodies, the wounds are still there. And I've heard from several, not necessarily so many students, but even staff and faculty members of Asian descent who feel really isolated at Cal Poly Pomona. Despite having a Black president who's very supportive and who's there to lend an ear, but regardless, feel that they don't see enough of themselves, and they feel very. I was on a call for a long time yesterday with someone who felt very isolated and alienated because of what's going on. How do we begin to heal? How do we work on restorative justice as we work on social justice? And you may not have an answer for this. I'm just kind of picking your brain, on what are some strategies that we can use to begin to heal, to build coalitions between communities of color, trans bodies, queer bodies. It's really about anti-oppression work, right? I know that a lot of folks talk about anti-racist work, but I do believe it's beyond race. You and I both, combat misogyny and, transphobia and homophobia, but it's really about how do we build a community through healing practices, through a restorative justice lens. I'm kind of like, I don't know. I'm grappling of like, how do we do this in a way that is going to be gracious, in a
Mhm.
way that's going to be inclusive of students' voices, as opposed to just faculty and administrators telling students, this is how you must be feeling, so this is what we're going to do, right? Like, how do we do this? Like, what are some first steps? And it's for our student leaders here who are helping the Department of Sociology in really mentoring our other majors. Like, they're taking on an elevated role because they represent the department.
Right.
What do we do? Because it can feel paralyzing at times.
Right. Well, I think that it's okay to think, to start small. I do think that doing coalition work and really trying to find those places where we can come together across issues and recognizing that they come from the root of something that's very similar.
Mm.
And so I've only been in what I would call one really coalition effort that I thought was effective and sustained. And it involved having folks from a range of different racial and ethnic groups. And we were fairly balanced, about 6 to 8 per group, except for Indigenous folks in the US. So we only had 2 folks in the group who identified as Indigenous Native American. But every other group was really well represented and even, and that was very conscious of the organizers.
Mhm.
And making sure that there were times for us to be together as a group and just to have real conversations and about real issues, about where do you feel included, where do you feel excluded, what do you need to be in coalition. And we were able to have conversations that really began to get at, what does it take for us to trust a group? What does it take for us to trust individuals in that group? And it's actually where I met Kathy Wong Lau.
Mm.
When I think about sort of the connections that I made out of that group that have been sustained. And that group was formed a lot by Karen Matai Musel. I don't know if you know her. She was a senior vice president at AACNU. She's since retired. But it was a really pretty amazing group of faculty and staff across the country and all different types of institutions, community colleges, four-year liberal arts schools, R1s. So research universities, sorry. And so I think about, it was really helpful for us to do that. And it was also helpful for us to really just have those kinds of conversations and to spend time with each other.
Mhm.
Now, granted, that was in what I call the before times, because we actually got together face to face
Right.
in the same room, not a Zoom room. And thinking about how that can happen for institutions as well today. I know that it's important, and it's one of the things that I'm actually have been called upon. I'm working with the university right now around some of this.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of it is getting folks to listen to each other. And it's been really important for that school to have listening sessions for the students, where students can come and listen to each other, but they also really wanted faculty and staff to just listen about, what is our day-to-day experience, moving through the world, being a student at the same time that this pandemic is going on, that we're seeing a rise in, both verbal and physical abuse and hate against Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, as well as the Black Lives Matter movement getting sort of more momentum. And as well, seeing what's happening around immigration, particularly the conditions on the southern border of the US. And so I have to say that all of those things have led to what I consider, like, it's a pressure point. It's like we're in a pressure cooker right now. And one of the things that I'm encouraging faculty to do is require less. Still ask for students to understand the basic ideas of the discipline or that course, but you don't need to do as much. You don't need to do as many assignments. Think about those assignments that will really help them apply the information. Think about it in terms of projects, because students are being asked to do so much right now. And I feel like I'm at this one university that I've been doing work at for about 3 years. I'm really watching the students just say, enough is enough. You're not seeing us. Like, when faculty just want to do it the same way, but on Zoom, the students feel like you're not seeing us. And that's not helpful. And I think also ignoring what's happening in the world isn't helpful. Because when when the murders happened in Atlanta, some faculty still had exams those days. They didn't mention it. And specifically the Asian Pacific Islander students felt like, do you not notice me? And so there was quite, there was understandably so, and I support the students, there was backlash for them being ignored that day. But, you know, they're also learning at how to integrate this and not just see everything as a separate incident, and to understand that that's not where it started. So, you know, and people have to be willing to be wrong and to be humble, and to listen to others. Because I just ask people to say, well, what happens if it is true? Because you would say, oh, no, that is like, but what happens if it is? You know, and that's what, you know, is cognitive empathy, the ability to really see other perspectives and really hold them.
I think what's so interesting about, you know, as an Asian American woman growing up in the Bay Area, this is nothing, you know, I've experienced this growing up, right? So it's for me, you know, just fighting. And, you know, I always kind of semi-tease that I used to beat up people, but it was really because to protect myself. And then once you beat up the toughest person, no one ever touches you again, right? So that's one of the reasons why I was kind of in that mode. But experiencing racism and sexism, all that stuff, it was a kind of a daily, it was a microaggression, right? It was a daily aggression that was held toward me. I think one of the things that I hear people saying is, wow, I can see it happening in Atlanta, but in Oakland, in New York, you know, in LA. And this is where folks begin to dilute the impact of institutional racism. Because the reality is it's all around us, right? I mean, it is all around us. And LA, California, they're not immune to institutional racism. This is a sickness. It's more than a sickness. I mean, it's part of decolonization too, right? I mean, I always say we need to really decolonize our minds and get back to indigenous ways in many ways to kind of think about collectivism and supporting each other. If you look at in Hawaii, the notion of ohana is taking care of the malama aina and taking care of the people around you. The neoliberal state and the colonization takes away from that collectivism and focuses on the individual. So that cognitive empathy that you're talking about becomes distorted. And people will feel like, oh yeah, I know what you mean. Or people even ask me like, is it really that bad? You know, they ask me like, I'm hearing about all this stuff. Is it really that bad? And it's a trigger for me. The things that folks don't realize, that things like this, I handle my triggers well, but inside I just want to punch their face, right? That's my old fifth grader coming out. But it's a trigger when folks deny hurt. And I think that's one of the reasons for me why I am such a champion for Black Lives Matter, for undocumented, you know, during the whole Muslim ban thing, you know, queer communities. Because I understand what that kind of hurt feels like. I understand what oppression feels like. I don't think you have to have experienced it to have that cognitive empathy that you're talking about. I don't think you necessarily have to experience it, right? And I think that's the thing that folks don't understand. It's like, well, it didn't happen to me or anybody I know. So maybe it's not so bad. These are just isolated incidents. And again, like you're saying, people are failing to listen to the pain of other folks, of what they're going through. And so if everyone is saying it, now like more and more APIs are coming out, you know, with groups like Stop AAPI Hate, you know, my friend Julia has a Make Noise campaign going on. You know, there's a lot of communities that are coming out and trying to do something. But I think students in higher ed also feel a sense of like what can we do? You know, I think that's, and if it's okay for me to kind of talk about one of our PM leads, not meaning to embarrass you, Talia, but Talia has been great over spring break. She's been working on videos to try to think about how can I help educate my own community, my own family. you know, how can I start doing this? Doesn't have to be huge. I don't know that much, but I want to do something. And I love that. I think it's such a wonderful, it gives me hope. People like Talia give me hope because they're people who are going outside their box, outside their own communities to say, I want to support this community. But I think for some students, they may not have that motivation or the willpower because pandemic sucks. We're all tired, right? People are exhausted. And even if they want to do it, and then they have guilt for not doing it, right? And so I think I'm just
Oh,
trying to figure out, like, how do we help sustain our students and our community and not shame them because they're not doing anything, right? Because sometimes you just can't. You're just exhausted. And then for those who have the energy, how do we give energy when you yourself are so exhausted, right? Like, how do you do that? And I love your earlier example of finding that community. Let's build one, Sharon. Let's do another one that really includes students this time, you know, of folks who could kind of revitalize our soul a little bit and give us hope, you know, and we've got to bring Talia in there because Talia always gives me hope of, you know, of trying to do better,
right.
you know, trying to do, even if that something is for us, right? Even if it's just taking care of us, that's something too. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Oh, absolutely. The ability to take care of yourself is so important because if you don't, you'll burn out.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you have to figure out and not to feel guilty about it. It's like, when is it okay for you to take a break?
Mm-hmm.
When is it okay for you to enjoy a mindless movie?
Yeah.
It used to be that I couldn't go to movies. I couldn't watch TV because they all pissed me off because it was all just, you know, they would just buy into some form of oppression. And I think, and they, oh my gosh, Sharon, if you don't stop
right,
and just enjoy something for just even an hour,
mm-hmm.
You know, and I think about my sphere of influence in terms of, I might not be able to impact somebody the next state over, but I think about, well, my sphere of influence right now is my family. You know, my family Zooms. We Zoom twice a month, my extended family. And so I think about that. Or I think about in high school, I staged a strike at Thanksgiving dinner. It wasn't that popular, but it was my idea for, you know, let's do this for womankind. But, you know, and for that meal, I mean, my family still remembers it. The men in my family, you know, got up and started serving dinner because I was getting my aunts who, you know, they were my elders. And so they were just like, it was like, you can't do that. You can't do that. You can't get your Aunt Mary to sit down, you know, it's like, and I was just like, come on, I got them all to sit down with me. And, you know, we cooked, but we weren't going to serve. So I had to draw the line. And I just remember getting all of my aunts to sit down and my cousins, my male cousins were like, so where's dinner? Oh, it's in the kitchen. When's it coming? Whenever you're hungry enough to go get it and bring it to the table. And I was like linking arms with my aunt saying, you're not moving. And they were like, I guess they were just going to humor me because they were like, oh, you know, we have to let Sharon, you know, be a leader. So we're just going to like, let her do this one time. But we stayed sitting until the guys got up and did it. And I felt so proud of my aunts and also of my male cousins because they finally said, okay, fine. And they went and did it, you know, and at least they didn't just serve their own plates and then just say, yeah, you know. But it was about, that was my sphere of influence. That's who I could influence that day. And I think about, you know, if I were a student today, you know, my sphere of influence are those folks that, you know, might be part of my social media community or might be part of a class or the folks that I, you know, get together and hang out with outside. But just trying to think about how to think about my sphere of influence, how to make sure I give myself time for a break. Because, you know, sleep and laughter are really important. And it's healing. And I will say that the universities will always listen to students, unfortunately, more than they will listen to anybody else, more than staff, more than faculty. So if the students say things, all of a sudden they'll sit up and take notice and go, oh. So I say all it takes is about a half dozen students getting together in alignment on one issue. And all of a sudden you've got the attention, whether it's the department chair, the dean, the provost, the president.
Mhm. And that's the part that I think students don't realize, right? That a lot of times students feel like, well, what kind of power do we have? And if you look at any type of social justice or social movements in higher ed, majority are student-led, majority. Very few are faculty staff led. Students demand, for example, ethnic studies.
Yep.
Demand ethnic studies during the late 60s in San Francisco and then at Berkeley. That's how we have ethnic studies programs today. And if you look at the coalition that was built between Black, Latino, and Asian American communities, that's what really started. And then indigenous communities were instrumental, especially with the hostage taking of Alcatraz, right, in terms of demanding indigenous recognition. And my bad, I forgot to do, and this is something I was telling Daniela earlier, I'm really bad and I'm trying, and it's okay if I put it in the middle of the land acknowledgement, right, that we need to acknowledge the land that we stand on. So I'm going to ask Daniela really quickly to give us our land acknowledgement because I forgot.
Okay, hi everyone. Good afternoon. I would like to take this time to give the land acknowledgements for the land that we're on. If we were on campus, we would be on the land of the Tonga people. So I would like to thank and recognize the land our campus is on. I am currently on Rialto. So upon research, I have found out I'm on the Serrano people land. And I just wanted to thank the ancestors, the people of the past, present, and really thank everybody for the land that we are on. And if everybody can mention in the chat where the area that they're from, so we can give some land acknowledgement as well and thank the land that we are on, that'd be really awesome.
Thanks, Daniela. Sharon, I've just been notoriously trying to be much more mindful of giving the land acknowledgement because it is so important for us to remember why, how we're here. If as a settler state, when you think about folks who are here as settlers, we're not from this place, and recognizing the role that colonization has had on our communities, that is a legacy, right? From enslaving indigenous communities, then enslaving Black bodies, and then enslaving through indentured servitude, Asian bodies, Latino bodies, through different means, and so I think when you think about what we've done to Black communities through the slave trade is something that is the mark of shame on this country. And what they did later on is modified it and made things not in terms of forcing people to come and stealing people's bodies to come to this country, but manipulating people to coming, whether through colonizing their places and destroying their ecosystem or their environment altogether, where they are fleeing to come to this place for opportunities and so forth. So there are different means. And I did sidetrack a little bit because I think when we talk about restorative justice, it's so important for us to understand history. It's so important for us to understand our place, and not to feel guilty about it, because I think Sharon and I've talked about the notion of white guilt when we talk about racism. A lot of folks who are well-meaning experience kind of like white guilt for racism, that they feel that other white people, it's not white racism is not about white people. Right? It's not about individuals. It's about structural, institutional white supremacy, right? It's not about individual. I have incredible white allies. Sharon, you and I love Justin to death because he's one of our best allies ever, and probably has a higher consciousness than so many other people that I know of color, in terms of, so just because you're Black and brown doesn't mean you have that consciousness either, because there's a lot of work that people have to do to deal with internalized racism and so forth. And I think that the challenging part for students too, and I so appreciate your frankness, and I want our group here to start thinking about questions that you have for Dr. Washington, is that I don't think we have to come up with a solution. I don't think that's what a leader is meant to be, right? I don't think a leader means you yourself have to solve the problems. Right? I don't think that's what leadership means. And sometimes folks shy away from taking on positions because they feel like the responsibility bears on their shoulder if they take on the role of president, if they take on the role of whatever. And that's why I want to go back to the quote of what I really feel is like embodies you, is that the notion of a team, a collective group,
Mhm.
right? Allowing us to make things move forward and not one singular person. So even though you talk about the we in your past tense because of your identical twins, I love us talking about we even today, because I think as a collective, that's how we move forward. And one of the reasons why I developed this peer mentoring program is because I knew there's no way I can do it alone. I knew there's no way that faculty members in our department could do it alone. We needed more leaders, right? And so I just wanted to kind of open it up for students to ask questions, but also Sharon, if you have any final thing that I've asked you this before, as they're gathering their thoughts,
Yeah.
is kind of like a mantra or saying that you live by, you know,
Wow.
and what does it mean to you?
So let me think about that one. I had a couple of other thoughts going through my head.
Okay.
One is you don't need to have the answers as a leader, but you do need to have good questions.
Right.
And you need to encourage good questions from others. Land acknowledgement. One of the things that I'm actually encouraging schools to begin to think about, in addition to a land acknowledgement, that is words. I'm asking them to think about 1% or some portion. It might be a half of a cent, a half of a percent of tuition or concessions or whatever are donations made to Indigenous communities in that area.
Mm.
I know that there's a group of Ohlone elders who are doing a buyback of land in the Northern California East Bay area. And so that's one of the things that I'm going to encourage institutions to start making donations to. But, or it might be the Native American Health Center in Oakland, but just trying to think about how that land acknowledgement can go beyond what we say, but can also be what we do. In terms of mantras that I might live by, I have 3 questions that I sort of will keep asking myself as more of a check-in. And it's sort of what I call my litmus test in terms of, is something gonna be okay? When I think about when I'm in a situation of having to make a decision as in a leadership position. And I think the first thing is I do a gut check and I try to figure out, like, how does it feel to make a particular decision? And I try to live with that gut check for a moment, just to sort of get it, because my gut will always tell me. If I'm willing to listen to my body, it's going to tell me, that's not the right thing to do. If you're feeling a little nauseous, that's not it. So I go with my gut check. That's one. The second one I look at is this decision aligned with my values? Whether it be my values of social justice, my values of honesty, my values of collective work, but does it align with my values? And the last one is, and this one really dates me, because I have to say I haven't come up with a current question that would actually fit today's sort of media. So the question I would always ask myself is, do I want to be in the newspaper tomorrow? And I would always say, nope. So therefore, we're not going to do that, because I never wanted to be in the paper. And it really didn't even matter, but I was amazed at how often I would be asking myself that question, at least monthly, if not more often. And I'd be like, nope. And yeah, so those are the 3 things I think about: my gut check, align with my values, and did I want to be in the paper? So I'd be like, And I have to say that I love student organizing and student protests. I know that some schools are just like, oh, if we could just not have another student protest. But I have to say that my most unique experience was at Spelman, where the students made an appointment to have a protest. And I have to say that it was so polite. Because I got, my assistant said, Sharon, there's a group of students who want to make an appointment. They've got a manifesto. And I was like, they want an appointment? I said, well, how many? They said, I think we need the conference room. I said, whatever. If they want to schedule the conference room, let them, of course. And they were all dressed up. They had everything written down. And I was like, students at other universities and colleges do protests a little different. and they said, well, what does it look like? I said, they don't make an appointment. First of all, they said, sometimes it's a surprise factor, but other than that, I'm in a position now where I really can't tell you how to protest. I can just encourage you to use your voice and find another way, because I was like, this is not a protest. I was just like, and they were like, oh, okay. And I was like, because I knew the president would be furious if I, as the provost, went out and told the students how to protest. But I was just like, find another way to get attention, to make sure that people hear you. And they're like, oh, okay, thank you. Thank you. I was just like, so of course, when they had their protest, I was so excited. I went to it. I was there. They were like, and they looked at me like, I was like, way to go. You're getting noisy and you're doing chalk and you're doing all sorts. I was like, yes.
Oh my gosh. I always like kind of wish like our students would protest more too. I think that it's for me, it does give me hope as well that students care. I know students care, and our students are, again, so busy with working and childcaring and all the other stuff too. So I totally get sometimes it's overwhelming, but some of the students who do get out there and raise their voices, it's just like, wow, like there's hope. I always feel like there's still hope. So, and I love your idea about giving a percentage back to the Indigenous community, because as we know, like in George Washington, they did that because George Washington University was built on the backs of slaves, and so they are giving free tuition for anyone who can show that they have ancestry to a former slave who helped build the school, which I think you just had to be an ancestor to a former slave, right, in George Washington. So I think that's really awesome. It's a part of restorative justice, right? It's a part of doing some type of work to acknowledge, not just like you said in words, but in action. So I really love that. I don't know if California state university system can do something like that. Maybe that needs to be passed to the legislature, but that would be an awesome thing to do at the CSU, especially because so many of our campuses do sit on Indigenous land.
Oh yeah.
And I think that would be the right thing to do. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And maybe that's something that some students will want to kind of help lead that cause in, whether it's a writing campaign or, just asking to talk to, the president. Obviously, our president can't necessarily do anything about it, but maybe it's a legislative type of thing, because it is a CSU wide, and like some private schools where the presidents can make decisions, the CSU system is different. Yes. But that is something that is a great idea. I love that. All right, I want to use the remaining of the 15 minutes to open it up to students. So just so you know, or anyone else who's here, just so you know that I cannot see your hand rise if you are not on video. So I think earlier when Brianna had her thing up, I'm going to take us off the pin for really quick, so that way we can see everybody. And I think of Daniela and Kelly, if you can help us with just kind of figuring out, who is currently here. And Danielle, I'm trying to take your pin off, but I can't seem to do it. Do you want to try to, let me see. Let me try it again. All right, here it goes. All right. So if you have a question or a comment that you would like to make to Dr. Washington, go ahead and raise your hand, or, you could also, note on the comment section below. So do we have any questions or comments for Dr. Washington? I think Susanna Sandoval wrote in the chat, a college student-led legislation would be amazing. Ballot referendum is possible to gather legal support. So thank you for that, Susanna. That would be really awesome, right? A college student-led initiative. And I think you just need so many signatures for that.
I think
All right.
I have your hand.
Yeah, Talia.
Hello, I'm Thalia, and I just wanted to ask, how do you get people to pay attention despite their biases?
And can you say a little bit more about pay attention? Pay attention to what they're saying, or?
Right, I'm sorry. For issues that are important, that matter, like the Asian hate, for example, how would you get people to pay attention if they're kind of not wanting to be aware, if they're ignoring what's going on?
Mhm. Well, if they are faculty, it's something where I just say, well, whether it's something that you pay attention to, I want you to just sort of reflect on maybe why not? You know, is there something in there where you're maybe not as sort of open to thinking about it? Is it because it feels too painful? Or does it come from a place of privilege? It might not feel intentional to you, but if you are, you know, somebody who resides in, you know, in who you are, and you're not Asian Pacific Islander, you just think that doesn't touch me, then if it's touching your students or your colleagues, then why would it not be something that you'd want to pay attention to? And so I really try to just tap into their belief that they are an inclusive person, or what does it mean to be effective? It's like, you're not going to be the most effective faculty member you can be if you're not paying attention to issues that are impacting your students.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges for some of our, you know, students and faculty and staff is that it's not just our college campuses, sometimes it's our private homes, right? It's like the people that we reside with. So while some of us may be very fortunate to have a supportive family environment, you know, within our own personal sphere, other folks have just a frustrating time, right? With whether it's your immediate family, parents, partner, or friends, you know, that maybe it's not that they don't believe that it's happening, but they don't think it really is that important. And I think that just makes some of us feel kind of disgusted, you know, and then you kind of wonder, and, you know, when you think about the election of Trump in the past, it kind of broke a lot of families, right? Because like you said, your second question of values, does it align with my values? Sometimes I think things like this, whether it's the anti-Asian hate or elections, or, you know, university decisions about whatever policies, it doesn't align with our values. And then I think sometimes people feel a little bit disenchanted with the whole process, right? And so I think I think Talia's question is more broad too, right? Not just campus, but also family. And it's hard. I think, I don't know if Dr. Washington actually has an answer for that either.
Well, actually I do. I'll give an example. So, you know, I'm Black, and my mom is Black as well. And she brought one of her Black friends to visit me when I lived in Massachusetts. And so this woman is my mother's peer. So she's an elder, and I was raised to treat elders a particular way. And it's the first night of a 5-night visit. We're at dinner, and this woman talked about, she was so proud of herself for getting the price that she wanted on a car. And she used an offensive phrase that really is disparaging to Jews. And I was like, and I just sort of like barely raised an eyebrow. And I looked at my mother, and she was just like, uh-oh. You know, I could tell she was holding her breath because she knew who I was. And so for just a moment, I had to work it out. So I excused myself and quickly cleared the table. And as I was in the kitchen, I was like, ugh. Okay. So then I came back out and I said, wow, you know, I'm going to fictitious last name. Mrs. Jones. I said, I had no idea that people use that phrase anymore. And I just sort of took this place of curiosity. And she was like, really? And I said, I haven't heard it in so long. I'm wondering, and then I used an example that I knew would make her sit up. I said, I wonder if that's the same thing when one of my white students said to me, when they were out working on the fence on their farm, that they nigger rigged it. I said, and I was really offended by that. And the student was just like, it just means that we just sort of put it together any old way. And I was like, huh. And Mrs. Jones was like, well, oh, that's bad. And I said, I wonder if possibly Jewish folks feel the same way about that phrase. And she goes, well, they just might. And then my mother was just like, because she was wondering whether or not I would disrespect Mrs. Jones as an elder. And so, the meal went on, we finished, and my mother was going to bed and she pinched me, which is her way of getting my attention. She just sort of grabbed me. She goes, I knew you weren't going to let that go. And I said, hey, I said, you bring your friends to my house. I'm going to be respectful, but I'm going to address it. And I thought it was a little dicey because, they were going to be with us for 5 days.
Yeah.
But that's how I had to come up with something that I knew she would wince at herself.
Yeah, it's really putting herself in that position, right?
Yeah.
Position of the other and just understanding how that would feel for them. Yeah, you're very gracious. But I think that probably was the best way to handle a situation like that. It is a great example. I think Octavio had a question, but it's pretty long. So Octavio, I'm going to have you ask it.
Yeah.
I mean, it took me a while to write it. I was trying to figure out how to articulate it without going off on a tangent and providing too much backstory. But I guess my question is, how do we navigate through the dangers of being vulnerable? And surrounding that was I know I wanted to quote you from earlier. I think you said you look forward to making new mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And that just took off so much stress off my shoulders because it kind of normalized that making mistakes is okay. And then we're able to move forward from there. But through my undergrad experience, I've wanted to take on a lot of leadership roles, but I always have a fear that if I make a mistake, as being part of a team member, that I may face losing an opportunity based off of self-disclosure, already being part of a team where I feel like I don't belong due to just feeling like I don't belong.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that, your question is so real and nuanced about what we actually can feel and go through when we think about making ourselves vulnerable. And I will say that I sort of came to this a little slowly myself in terms of making myself vulnerable and how much do I disclose about myself, because it wasn't always this way. But I got to a place where I was just like, it just who I am, and I have to be able to do some of that. But it was always felt like it was my choice. And I was very aware that some mistakes that I made would be attributed to the fact that I was a woman or attributed to the fact that I was Black. And they would be used, some people would try to use that as a weapon against me, or a way to say see, we knew she couldn't do that. And so I began to really try to think somewhat strategically about, doesn't mean that I will always make mistakes, but I sort of much more out there at the beginning about it. So I let people know that, yeah, it might not be perfect. There might be some mistakes, but one of the things that I'm clear about is that I want to learn from those. I want to figure out how to make things better. And, pulling on sort of the Silicon Valley culture of, make mistakes often and early, which I understand there's a privilege about being able to make mistakes often, Because when you have more privilege in our society, those mistakes are just sort of written off as, oh, it's just a mistake. And for others, it's not seen that way. So there's tension in there.
Yeah, I feel the essence of having privilege because I've recently shifted from feeling like I don't belong to realizing my talent and my potential to feeling like people are threatened by my presence, right? So now I kind of like try to build a community of people where I could tap into and let them know about a situation before I self-disclose to the team, to where I may already be facing barriers of promotion or feeling excluded. So now what I've been doing is like I'll kind of run my scenarios by people who I feel are, aligned with me with facing these situations.
Yeah.
See what how to proceed and move forward. I don't know if that's the right way of going by it. So I just felt like I could maybe think out loud to see if what I'm doing is okay and if there's any other guidance.
Oh, yeah. Having a sounding board is so important. The ability to try something out with someone that's really going to sort of hold it confidential and just give you good feedback. And I will say, good feedback is amazing. It's like, don't tell me what you think I want to hear. Tell me what it is.
Yeah, just keeping it raw, right?
Yeah.
I like that. All right, thank you.
Sure.
I think Kelly has her hand up.
Yes. So, kind of going off about feedback, I wanted to ask. So currently in my, I'm the current president of an organization on campus. And, there was a situation, during one of our executive board meetings. I wouldn't necessarily say it's like a negative feedback, but someone, one of our members told me that like, oh, Kelly, I think you need to be more assertive. And, that's all they said to me. And in my position, I was like, I after the e-board meeting, I kind of thought about that and I was like, what do they even mean by that? Like I took it personally, and to me at least, I saw it as like a negative way, because like, as an Asian American woman myself, in a leadership position, stereotypically we're seen as more like submissive, and we're supposed to sit back and kind of like be quiet. So like when they told me to like, oh, you need to be more assertive, I was like, what does that kind of like even mean? So, in your position, like how do you kind of deal with, comments like that or those type of like feelings?
Oh yeah, because they do come up. And for me, it's usually the people being quick to say, well, you just seem like an angry Black woman. Really? It's like, if I was an angry Black woman, believe me, you would know, and it would look like this. But and so I just think about people's own stuff keeps coming up all the time, and they project it. So I would come back and to the comment of, you need to be more assertive. Can you tell me a little bit about where that comes from and why you would think that? And because sometimes it has to do with them, not as you. And I do think that the best feedback is specific feedback. So saying be more assertive is not really good feedback. It's like, I would like to hear you be more explicit when you are asking for what, or you are giving directions or something, but it's like, be more assertive is just not good feedback. And for me, I just have to keep telling myself, this is not about me. This is about them. Because otherwise I start taking it really personally. And then I spend a lot of time thinking about how I can be different, how I can change. And it doesn't mean that I can't learn and change, but I have to really recognize when something is coming out of somebody's own stuff and their own assumptions, and just telling myself like, it's okay. This is not about you. When being a provost isn't necessarily the most fun. I mean, I loved it, but faculty do get really upset sometimes. And so you just have to say like, isn't that special? They're not really angry at me. They're angry at the situation, and I get it. And the highest praise I ever got from a faculty member was, "You're not as bad as I thought you were going to be." I was like, and I had to restrain myself. Well, I didn't. I said, "Well, what did you think I was going to be, Bernie?" And he goes, "Well, I thought you were going to come in here and blah, blah, blah." And I was like, "Oh, so I wasn't that bad." He goes, "No, you weren't. You were really pretty good. Thanks, Bernie." I was like, I had to sort of like cut it off there because I didn't want him to go on, but it was just like, wow.
Well, Dr. Washington, our time has ended. We have one question by Michelle. They have a question for you. So I'm going to go ahead and let them ask, and then I'll give you a nice farewell afterwards. Go ahead, Michelle.
Oh, sorry about that. I just right in time when I raised my hand when you were going to say that. I just kind of going back on the subject. When you have those like moments like, oh, it's not about me. It's like I for me going through college, I realize I'm having these moments a lot where it's like, oh, it's not about me. It's something about them that they are dealing with, and like, but somehow you kind of internalize that. And I guess my advice, or like, what advice would you give as a way to kind of shield yourself from that, of not internalizing the words and the thoughts and whatever's going on in that situation?
I think that, I don't know if this is going to be helpful, but when I hear those things and I know that it's not really about me, I have to just tell myself they're operating with their own information based on their own experiences, and it might be misinformation. But for the most part, I just assume that they're really not trying to hurt me. And I just give them as much grace as I can and just say, like, they don't know. And I just have to keep saying, it's not about me. And when I'm being not in my best self, I just say, look at that. I work with fools. And then I am able to laugh, and then I just keep going. So you can either choose the high road or the slightly like,
And sometimes we chose both, right? And sometimes we can be high, and then other times you're just like, I work with fools.
I should get a shirt that says that.
I love that. I love that. I think that would be, it would make people laugh too. Thank you, Michelle, for that question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It has been a fun hour with you, Dr. Washington, and thank you so much for spending it with us and unpacking your knowledge and sharing your experience and learning some new stuff about you that I did not know. Hope to meet your twin one day. And when things are better, I know we're double vaxxed, so we can go dancing for at least a couple of hours. So we can work off our steam. But thank you so much.
Oh my gosh.
So much gratitude and appreciation for all that you do for, higher ed, continue to do, but also for our friendship and for you making the time. So thank you.
Absolutely. Anything that you ever want. And it has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Dr. Mary. And wow, and I'm just like, dealing with you calling me Dr. Washington is like, what? What are you doing? Dr. Danico, it's like, no.
Yeah, well, you have such a great breadth of experience, but I think what I hope that a lot of our, viewers and students are taking away from you is that to be a leader, it's not the stereotypical notion of a leader, but one that is kind, one that is smart and ferocious, because, Dr. Washington definitely is, but one that is very mindful and vulnerable and open to changes. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks everyone for coming today. We'll be having another Weglyn event on the 13th with Maya Sotero. We're talking about navigating leadership and restorative justice over there through the Pacific Islander lens. So, but thank you so much. And I'm going to stop this Facebook.